They waited for him to fall asleep, leapt on him, killed him, and then proceeded to eat his head. Welcome back, friends. My name is Jason, and today I'm telling you a story about Pierre Viaud. It's French, probably not pronouncing that right, but who cares? It's French. Kidding. That's a joke. Kidding for all my French viewers out there, all three of you. So Pierre was on a French merchant vessel sailing towards New Orleans. That was the end destination. Storm came, ship slammed into a reef off the coast of Florida near an island called Dog Island, a very small little reef island off the coast of Florida, just south of Tallahassee. Pierre and his amigos, his compatriots, his compadres, his comrades were heading towards New Orleans on a French merchant vessel. And the year was 1766. Storm came, they ran aground on a reef just off the coast of Florida near a small island called Dog Island. And this is just south of Tallahassee, Florida. As this ship struck this reef, I guess the crew knew that they were doomed, and some of them leapt off of the boat trying to get to some sort of land, and some of them died in the process, getting smashed into these sharp coral rocks. But despite this ship being wrecked, there were some survivors, and these survivors kind of grouped up together. They scavenged supplies off of the wreck as best they could, and they made do with what they had on Dog Island. So eventually what happened, according to Pierre, was that the group, him, a woman named Lacouture, and his slave separated from one another. So it was just the three of them, the woman, Pierre, and his slave, and the rest of the group went on their separate way to survive this ordeal. So it's described that some of the natives led them astray while pretending to lend aid to Pierre and his shipmates. They ended up just leading them astray and stealing a lot of their supplies, which may or may not have happened. People have shown themselves to do things of this nature throughout history and take advantage of people in a weakened state. So I'm not saying that it's true. I'm not saying that it's not true. It just wouldn't be surprising if that was the case. Luckily, this was in February. February in Florida isn't that bad. I've been there. I used to live in Florida. I lived in South Florida for a long time. I went to elementary school and part of middle school in South Florida. Kind of, sort of semi-grew up there. The summertime in Florida, the bugs are absolutely terrible. Mosquitoes in this area where Pierre was shipwrecked probably would have eaten him alive if it was the summertime. Luckily, it was February, and the bugs aren't nearly as bad. Now, I'm not saying they don't exist, and I'm not saying they're not there, biting flies and all that. I'm just saying they wouldn't have been nearly as bad. The heat wouldn't have been nearly as intolerable. I mean, they might have gotten cold if they were wet. They might have suffered from hypothermia, perhaps, but they're not going to die of a heat stroke and not be carried away by swarms, flocks of giant mosquitoes. Now, in this area of Florida, there's really no shortage of food. Wild caught food is definitely accessible in these areas if you have the tools and you have the know-how to get it done. There's plenty of fish and oysters and all sorts of things that can be had if you know how to get them and you have the equipment, the tools to get them. And I'm guessing because of this shipwreck, Pierre may or may not have had a lot of this equipment. Fresh water is going to be a thing. To my knowledge, on Dog Island, there was no fresh water at the time. Now there's probably wells and all of that, but there definitely was not a well in this area at that time. So finding a fresh source of water was probably a really difficult situation. Now, I know from roaming the mangrove forests and stuff in the South Florida area that while it may appear that there's plenty of wildlife and an abundance of vegetation, it may appear that there should be some fresh water around, but I will tell you that it is very, very difficult to come across. Even in a place like the Everglades, for example, at certain times of the year, it's difficult to come across a fresh water supply, a drinkable water supply. It just depends. Depends on where you are and what time of year it is. So Pierre talks about his struggles with finding food, finding water, fresh water to drink, and creating shelters to protect them from the elements, whether that be the sun or precipitation. Now, he claims that they were attacked by fierce beasts. He says the bears were huge. The tigers, he called them tigers, probably Florida panthers, mountain lions, similar deal. If he saw them at all, that's what he was talking about. He said they were, constantly coming into camp and terrifying them. Now, he admittedly says that these creatures, the bears and the tigers, were probably not as big and probably not as fierce as his fear led them all to believe. He even tells a story of how his slave was chased up a tree by a bear, and Pierre had to fight off the bear with a flaming stick, a torch of sorts. While I'm not going to come out and say Pierre is an outright liar, I have encountered bears, and I've been in places with large cats before, and most of the time, my experience with bears, for example, especially black bears, is you see their backside running away from you. They want nothing to do with you, and that goes for the big cats as well, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, I would say. His story of the bear chasing his slave up the tree and him fighting him off with a torch, not quite that believable. And them being plagued by them nightly, probably not that true as well. Probably a little bit of an embellishment on his story. Now, despite it being February and in Florida, I still find his story of the troublesome insects to be probably valid. I remember sleeping because it was sort of chilly. It was probably 50, 60 degrees. I remember sleeping with my head completely covered up except for my mouth right here so I could still breathe. And I woke up the next morning and my lips were swollen. It looked like I had lip injections, filler put in my lips because of how many insect bites I had on my lips. It was pretty dang terrible. So I don't really question or doubt his claims that the insects were extremely troublesome. He says that they were bitten so badly that they could hardly open their eyes. And I believe it. If you don't have protection from these insects, it can get really, really miserable. I've seen everything from this ordeal lasting 81 days down to about 2 weeks. So exactly how long this ordeal lasted, it's hard to say. Gonna have to do a little bit more research on that to figure that one out, if at all possible, to figure out how long it actually lasted. But either way, he claims that the hunger was insatiable. It was really, really difficult, and that was an overwhelming pain. He said that they were literally resorting to, they were finding oysters and crabs and other things that were easy to catch and easy to grab, some plants and whatnot that were, easily accessible. But he says it was so bad that they were eating handfuls of sand just to fill something, get something in their belly to fill up their bellies and have the sense of nourishment. Now, according to Pierre, the hunger became so bad, so undeniable, so unavoidable, that he and his female companion were forced to jump on his slave in the middle of the night while he was sleeping. And kids, plug your ears, close your eyes for a second if you're watching. They jumped on him in the middle of the night while he was sleeping. They cut his throat and then proceeded to take the man apart. And they started, in Pierre's words, they started by cooking his head over the fire. Now, I don't know about this. I don't know if it's true at all. I don't know if it's partially true. I don't know if it's just completely made up and just complete exaggeration of this survival story to sell more copies of his book that he wrote back in the 1700s. That could definitely be the case. Now, I know I have gone a significant amount of time without eating before. I've gone nearly a month without really eating anything other than a few little scraps of stuff that I could scrounge up without real substance, And I never, ever got close to a point where I thought, you know what? I need to eat somebody. And I'm going to start with their head. I don't know. I've never been in a situation where I've gone longer than that, where I thought for sure if I don't make this decision, I'm going to die. But I'd like to think that I'm strong enough to resist that temptation and just die. And just succumb to the fatigue of the lack of nutrients, lack of calories in my body before I give in to that temptation, those hunger pains, before I give into that and do something so atrocious that, that's unforgivable. Maybe it's my belief, it's my faith that, that there's life beyond this life right here. Maybe that's what would be the difference. Maybe Pierre didn't have that. Maybe Pierre thought this is it, And if I die today from starvation, then it's over. It's just blackness and an abyss, perhaps. Maybe he didn't have the faith and didn't see the light at the end of this tunnel, that he didn't view this life as just temporary. So maybe that's the difference. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm better than Pierre. I'm not saying that I would do... I'd really like to believe that I would do things a lot differently and I would not have behaved in such a way under these extreme circumstances. I'd like to think that I would rise to the occasion and not only survive and get out of this ordeal, but do it with a clean conscience. I don't know, but I would like to think so. But eventually, what happened is Pierre and his female companion were rescued, and they go back to France eventually, and he proceeds to write this story down and tell his story to the world, and it became, I don't know if it was a bestseller, but it sold a lot of books. And my guess is he kind of exaggerated these tales to some degree, and throwing those extreme tales of cannibalism, in the wild, these wild tales of survival would undoubtedly pique people's curiosity and sell more copies of this book. I don't know. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. I wasn't alive in 1766. And thankfully, I wasn't on the ship with Pierre to have witnessed this firsthand. Now, I'll put a link to this book. I haven't read this book in entirety. I've basically just researched the synopsis and done as much research as I could on the subject. But I'd like to read this book and just really get into it. I think it's really interesting reading some of these older books and getting their perspective of the world as they saw it back in 1766, for example. So I'll put a link to this book. I think it's on Amazon. I'll put it in the description of this video, and I'll also try to put it in the comment section of the video. So if you want to check it out and you want to read, I think it's about 100 pages. So it's not a huge read, but if you wanted to read more about Pierre's story of survival and what actually happened according to the man that lived it, you can do that reading, do that research yourself. Now, guys, I really do appreciate you watching. Take a second to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button. Push that subscribe button and the notifications bell and all of that. Take a second to share this video with somebody that you think might appreciate it. I'd be really grateful for that. And in the comment section, I'd like to know how you would handle an extreme case of survival like this. Do you think that you'd be strong enough to resist the temptations, the primal temptations to do the wrong thing? I don't know. I'd like to think that I'm strong enough to do so. Friends and I, we always joke about, like rabbit starvation. If you've ever heard of rabbit starvation, it's a thing, Rabbits are so lean, they have no fat on them. You could eat a bunch of rabbits, and still starve to death because you're just getting basically pure protein, essentially. You could eat the organs and stuff like that and counteract this to some degree, but still, if you eat just rabbit meat, you could still starve to death because of the lack of fat. And we joke that, in a survival situation, what you got to do if you're with a group of people, what you got to do is you got to act fast. Because if you wait to the point where everybody is so emaciated and so thin and scrawny and wasting away that they don't have any fat on their bodies, we could still suffer from rabbit starvation if you plan on eating your friends. So what we've decided is you got to go immediately. Upon shipwrecks, immediately we need to start looking around and planning on who we're going to eat first because you just can't wait. These things matter in survival. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Hit the thumbs up, do the clicking. And until next time, friends, what's the worst that could happen? Let's just go on 3.